I don't have a huge amount to do with the book design and the covers and what have you. There's a terrific team at Puffin who take care of that. That's their remit, that's their world, that's their experience. And although I'm an illustrator at heart, I don't have anywhere near the ability to be able to produce this kind of work. I do have an opinion, possibly because of having worked as an illustrator and designer for animation for so many years. And Puffin have been really welcoming, sort of including me along the way and letting me chime in with change this bit, change that bit, and pandering to my little whims. But I've tried to be, I've been hopefully accommodating, although somebody at Puffin will probably tell you something different now. So yeah, I've been consulted, but I kind of completely trust the team here. They've done such a great job. Rise of the Wolf, it was a couple of years on and off working on that novel, or the manuscript for it. Obviously the first time anybody attempts to write a book, a novel, invariably it's a labour of love. You're untried, nobody knows what you're capable of. You have to find the time if you want to write the manuscript in the first place, you have to make some sacrifices. So when my children went to bed at night and any stolen moments I had, that's when I would be tinkering with it, writing it, redrafting it. So probably a couple of years to get the first one done whilst I was still doing other jobs. Once that was commissioned and the second book was picked up, I'd say probably about 6 months to write Rage of Lions, and it's taken me about 6 months to write the third book, which is nearing completion now as well. So I'm on about 2 books a year, which is quite a nice number to be working on. From a very young age, I had a twin love of fantasy and horror. Fantasy from the first book I ever picked up from my local library when I was 9 years old was, the first novel I picked up was The Hobbit. And although it took me about 3 months to read and cost me an awful lot in library fines throughout the summer holidays, I got there in the end, and then the seed was sown for that as well. The horror interest comes from watching all the old Universal Studio monster movies, the creature features, sneaking up late at night to watch it with my dad, the old black and white Wolfman and stuff like that. So I've always kind of loved horror as well. As time went by, I knew that if I was ever going to get to write a manuscript for a novel, it would probably be something that straddled both those genres. So in the case of Wereworld, I would describe it as epic fantasy horror, but I would say it's fantasy with a big F and horror with a small h. Although as time progresses with the story and the world darkens, horror does kind of the ante gets raised a little bit there as well. It starts to get a lot scarier. There's a temptation as an author. I would imagine it's when you're first published to go seeking out reviews and hear what people have got to say about your book. It's dangerous to do that because you have to take the good with the bad. It's lovely to receive positive praise. For example, Rise of the Wolf was shortlisted for the Waterstones Book Prize, which was a huge thrill. But you're not going to please everybody all the time, so if you do go out there looking and sniffing around for reviews of the work, then yeah, you're invariably going to come across some reviews that aren't positive, let's put it like that. But I'm thick enough skinned, as you can see, and I just have to kind of stick to my guns and know that what I'm writing has an audience who are in love with the story. Fantasy is not for everybody, and neither is horror. So hopefully the people who do love those genres and people who maybe have fallen out of love with reading a little bit can pick up Wereworld and fall back in love with the reading as well. That for me is something that gives me a bit of a thrill when I hear about people picking up a book and they haven't read for ages and they've fallen in love with it. That's been a really kind of pleasing side of the feedback that we've got. There's limitations there within the world setting because with it having its own mythology, all the Warelords have to have their own kind of strict rules for how they come into being, what the kind of structure is, the noble lines for the families. Can Warelords interbreed with one another? That's a question that I've been asked quite frequently as well. The answer is yes, and if you want to find out more, it's in the books. The actual writing side of it, the structure, I tend to write down a skeletal breakdown of each paragraph as I know where the story's going to go. But I let that stew and simmer for a good month or two before I actually commit to writing down the story. So I need to know where the plot lines are going. Occasionally I do have to rein that in, because in my head I want to tell 4 or 5 different storylines running at once. And my genius editor here very quickly steps in, slaps my wrist and says, "No, too many stories! Rein it in, focus on a couple of lead sort of storylines there, and that's our story that we're looking at." And so that probably comes from my love of adult fantasy, where you tend to get the more sprawling epic sort of storylines where you're following 4 or 5 different characters' tales. So hopefully as the audience grows with the books, there'll be more room to be able to kind of stretch out there and follow those other characters. If people want to know more about that, then that will help me kind of shoehorn those stories into the bigger picture as well.